Welcome to Mr. Horror, where we bring you the most scary horror stories that will leave you trembling with fear. In this video, we have 3 true camping stories of true horror. So, buckle up and get ready for a ride into the dark woods, where every step could be your last. It was supposed to be a fun camping trip. 4 friends, eager to escape the stress of their daily lives and explore the great outdoors. They packed their bags, loaded up the car, and set off on their adventure. But little did they know, they were about to experience something far more terrifying than they ever could have imagined. As they hiked deeper into the woods, the trees grew thicker and the shadows longer. The air grew colder and the silence more oppressive. But they pushed on, determined to find the perfect spot to set up camp. That's when they saw it. A clearing in the woods, surrounded by tall trees and shrouded in mist. It looked like something out of a fairy tale, but the feeling it gave them was anything but magical. As they set up their tents and started a fire, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They brushed it off, chalking it up to their overactive imaginations. But as the night wore on, things started to get strange. They heard strange noises coming from the woods, like something was moving just beyond the tree line. And every time they looked in that direction, they could swear they saw something moving just out of sight. Then, as they sat around the fire, they noticed that one of their chairs was empty. They called out for their friend, but there was no answer. They searched the surrounding area, but there was no sign of him. That's when they heard the scream. It was a blood-curdling sound that seemed to come from deep within the woods. They called out to their friend again, but there was still no answer. As they huddled together in terror, they realized that they were not alone in those woods. Something was out there, something dangerous and malevolent. And they were its prey. The fire flickered and danced, casting eerie shadows on the trees around them. Every sound seemed amplified, and the darkness was thick and oppressive. They had never been so scared in their lives. They could feel their hearts pounding in their chests as they tried to make sense of what was happening around them. Then, out of the darkness, they saw something move. It was a figure, tall and thin, moving silently towards them. They tried to run, but it was too late. The figure was upon them, its eyes glowing in the darkness. They could smell its rancid breath as it whispered in their ears, promising to take them away to a place where they would never be found. The fear was overwhelming, and they knew that they were in grave danger. They huddled together, their backs against the trees, and prayed that it would all be over soon. But the creature was relentless, its grip tightening around them with every passing moment. They were trapped, alone and scared, with no hope of escape. They knew that they were in for a long and terrifying night, one that they would never forget. The night seemed to drag on forever as they huddled together, trying to stay awake and alert for any signs of danger. The creature that had been stalking them in the woods was relentless, and they knew that they were in for a long and terrifying ordeal. As the first light of dawn began to break through the trees, they realized that they had survived the night. But the sense of relief was short-lived as they knew that they were still in danger. The creature was still out there, somewhere in the woods, waiting for them to let their guard down. They had to keep moving, to find a way out of the woods and back to civilization. They packed up their gear and started to walk, trying to put as much distance between themselves and the creature as possible. But every step they took seemed to bring them closer to danger. They heard strange noises in the woods, like something was moving just out of sight. And every time they looked over their shoulders, they could swear that they saw something following them. Their nerves were shot, and their bodies were weary from lack of sleep and constant fear. But they pushed on, knowing that they had no choice but to keep moving. As the day wore on, their supplies started to run low. They had little food or water left, and their energy was rapidly fading. They knew that they couldn't go on like this for much longer. Then, just as they were about to give up hope, they saw something in the distance. It was a cabin nestled deep in the woods. It was the first sign of civilization they had seen in days, and they knew that they had to investigate. As they approached the cabin, they could feel their hearts racing. They didn't know what they would find inside, but they hoped that it would be a place of safety and refuge. But as they opened the door and stepped inside, they realized that they had made a terrible mistake. The cabin was dark and musty, with strange symbols scrawled on the walls. And in the corner, they saw something that made their blood run cold. It was a pile of bones, picked clean and bleached white by the sun. They knew then that they had stumbled upon something truly horrific, something that they were never meant to see. They tried to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. It was as if something was holding it shut, trapping them inside. They were alone in the darkness, with no hope of escape. That's when they heard the whispering. It was a low, guttural sound that seemed to come from all around them. And every time they looked over their shoulders, they could see movement out of the corners of their eyes. They were trapped, alone and scared, with no way out. They knew then that they were facing something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Something that wanted to keep them there forever. The hours ticked by, and they were trapped in the cabin with no hope of escape. The whispering grew louder and more insistent, and they could feel the presence of something malevolent lurking just beyond the walls. They tried everything they could think of to escape, but nothing worked. The door was locked tight, and the windows were too small to crawl through. They were alone in the darkness with no way out. As the night wore on, their fear turned to desperation. They knew that they were facing something far beyond their understanding, something that they were never meant to encounter. But just when they thought that all hope was lost, they heard a sound outside the cabin. It was a low growl, like something was approaching from the woods. They could hear the sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, coming closer and closer, and then, with a sudden burst of energy, the door to the cabin burst open. Standing in the doorway was a figure, tall and imposing, with eyes that glowed in the darkness. It was the creature that had been stalking them, the one that had been terrorizing them for days. But instead of attacking them, the creature simply stood there, watching them with a strange intensity. And then, with a sudden burst of movement, it charged off into the woods, disappearing into the darkness. They were stunned, unsure of what had just happened. But they knew that they had been given a chance to escape, and they took it. They ran out of the cabin, into the woods, and didn't look back. As they emerged from the woods, they saw a group of park rangers approaching. They told the rangers everything about the creature in the woods and the horrors they had witnessed in the cabin. The rangers listened carefully, their faces grim with concern. They told the group that they had been searching for a dangerous predator that had been spotted in the area, a creature that was far beyond anything they had ever seen. The group realized then that they had been lucky to escape with their lives. They had stumbled upon something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined, and they knew that they would never be the same again. As they made their way back to civilization, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They knew that the creature was still out there, somewhere in the woods, waiting for its next victim. But they also knew that they had survived something truly horrific, something that few people would ever believe. They had faced their fears and come out the other side, and they knew that they would never forget what they had experienced in those dark and terrifying woods. The group had been planning their camping trip for weeks. They were excited to get away from the hustle and bustle of the city and spend some time in nature. They packed their bags, loaded up their car, and set off towards the campsite. As they arrived at the campsite, they felt a sense of relief wash over them. The sun was setting, and the woods were alive with the sounds of nature. They quickly set up their tents, started a fire, and sat around, chatting and enjoying the peace and quiet. But as the night wore on, things started to get strange. They heard noises coming from the woods, like something was moving just beyond the tree line. And every time they looked in that direction, they could swear they saw something moving just out of sight. They tried to brush it off, chalking it up to their overactive imaginations. But as the night went on, the noises got louder, and they realized that something was out there, watching them. That's when they heard the scratching. It was a low, guttural sound that seemed to come from just outside their tents. They tried to ignore it, but it was too persistent, too unsettling. Then, as they were settling in for the night, they heard a loud bang. It was as if something had hit their tents hard. They called out to each other, but there was no response. They were alone in the darkness, with no idea what was happening around them. As they sat in their tents, scared and alone, they heard something moving just outside. It was a slow, deliberate sound, like something was creeping towards them in the darkness. That's when they saw it. A figure, tall and imposing, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce the darkness. They screamed and tried to run, but it was too late. The creature was upon them, its grip tightening around them with every passing moment. They knew then that they were in grave danger. They were trapped, alone and scared, with no hope of escape. They had stumbled upon something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined, and they knew that they were facing a fight for their lives. The creature was relentless, its grip tightening around them with every passing moment. They could feel its hot breath on their necks, and they knew that they had to find a way to fight back. One of the group members managed to grab a nearby branch, and with a sudden burst of energy, they swung it at the creature. It recoiled, giving them a moment to catch their breath and plan their next move. They knew that they couldn't run, that they had to stand and fight. They gathered together, armed with anything they could find, and prepared to face the creature head-on. As they charged towards the creature, it let out a deafening roar. But they didn't back down. They fought with everything they had, determined to survive. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the creature retreated. It disappeared back into the darkness, leaving the group shaken and traumatized by their experience. As they sat around the fire, trying to process what had just happened, they knew that they could never forget the horror they had experienced that night. They had faced something far beyond their understanding, something that they were lucky to have survived. As the night wore on, the group tried to make sense of what had just happened. They were shaken and traumatized, but they knew that they had to keep moving. They had to find a way out of the woods and back to civilization. They packed up their gear and started to walk, trying to put as much distance between themselves and the creature as possible. But every step they took seemed to bring them closer to danger. They heard strange noises in the woods, like something was moving just out of sight. And every time they looked over their shoulders, they could swear that they saw something following them. Their nerves were shot, and their bodies were weary from lack of sleep and constant fear. But they pushed on, knowing that they had no choice but to keep moving. As the day wore on, their supplies started to run low. They had little food or water left, and their energy was rapidly fading. They knew that they couldn't go on like this for much longer. Then, just as they were about to give up hope, they saw something in the distance. It was a cabin nestled deep in the woods. It was the first sign of civilization they had seen in days, and they knew that they had to investigate. As they approached the cabin, they could feel their hearts racing. They didn't know what they would find inside, but they hoped that it would be a place of safety and refuge. But as they opened the door and stepped inside, they realized that they had made a terrible mistake. The cabin was dark and musty, with strange symbols scrawled on the walls. And in the corner, they saw something that made their blood run cold. It was a pile of bones, picked clean and bleached white by the sun. They knew then that they had stumbled upon something truly horrific, something that they were never meant to see. They tried to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. It was as if something was holding it shut, trapping them inside. They were alone in the darkness, with no hope of escape. That's when they heard the whispering. It was a low, guttural sound that seemed to come from all around them. And every time they looked over their shoulders, they could see movement out of the corners of their eyes. They were trapped, alone and scared, with no way out. They knew then that they were facing something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Something that wanted to keep them there forever. They searched the cabin for any way out, but found nothing. As they grew more and more desperate, they heard a sound outside. It was the sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate. They rushed to the window and looked out, their hearts pounding in their chests. And then they saw it. The creature that had attacked them in the woods was outside, watching them through the window. They knew then that they were facing their worst nightmare. They were trapped, alone, and facing an unknown, terrifying creature. They had to find a way out, or they would never make it out of the woods alive. The group was trapped, alone and scared, with no hope of escape. The creature was outside, watching them through the window, and they knew that they were facing their worst nightmare. They huddled together, trying to come up with a plan. They knew that they had to get out of the cabin, but the door was locked tight, and the windows were too small to crawl through. As the hours ticked by, their fear turned to desperation. They could feel the presence of the creature growing stronger, and they knew that they were running out of time. Then, with a sudden burst of inspiration, one of the group members remembered something. They had brought a flare gun with them, just in case of an emergency. They searched through their gear and found the flare gun, loading it with a flare and aiming it at the window. With a sudden burst of light, they fired the flare gun, breaking the window and allowing them to escape. They rushed out of the cabin, sprinting through the woods with the creature hot on their heels, but they didn't stop. They kept running, even as their legs ached and their lungs burned. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they saw the lights of civilization in the distance. They ran towards them, their hearts pounding with relief and exhaustion. As they emerged from the woods, they saw a group of park rangers approaching. They told the rangers everything about the creature in the woods and the horrors they had witnessed in the cabin. The rangers listened carefully, their faces grim with concern. They told the group that they had been searching for a dangerous predator that had been spotted in the area, a creature that was far beyond anything they had ever seen. As they made their way back to civilization, they felt a sense of pride in what they had accomplished. They had faced their fears and come out the other side, and they knew that they would never be the same again. They looked back towards the woods, knowing that the creature was still out there, waiting for its next victim. But they also knew that they had the strength and courage to face it, if it ever came to that. The group had been forever changed by their experience, but they had also grown in ways that they never thought possible. They had faced true horror, and they had come out the other side stronger and more resilient than ever before. The woods had always been a place of adventure for me, a place to escape reality and enjoy the beauty of nature. But this camping trip changed everything. It started off like any other camping trip. My friends and I pitched our tents near a beautiful river and started a bonfire. We shared stories and laughter, and it seemed like it was going to be a perfect trip. As the night got darker, we all started to settle down in our tents. But that's when things took a turn. I heard strange noises outside my tent, like someone was walking around. I thought it was just one of my friends trying to prank me, so I called out their names. But there was no response. I tried to ignore it and went back to sleep, but the noises continued. This time, they were louder and more persistent. It sounded like someone was trying to unzip my tent. I was scared, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just an animal trying to get in. But then I heard whispers. They were faint at first, but they grew louder and clearer. It was like someone was whispering right next to my ear. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it didn't sound friendly. That's when I realized that something was seriously wrong. I reached for my flashlight and turned it on. But as soon as the light illuminated my tent, the whispers stopped and the noises outside ceased. I didn't get any sleep that night, and the next morning, I told my friends what had happened. They brushed it off, saying it was just my imagination, but I knew what I had heard. As the day went on, things started to get even stranger. We found strange symbols carved into the trees and rocks around our campsite. And at night, we heard more whispers and footsteps around our tents. We tried to leave the next morning, but we couldn't find our way back to the trail. It was like the woods were trying to keep us there, and the more we tried to find a way out, the more lost we became. That's when we realized that we were in serious trouble. Something was stalking us in the woods, and we had no way to escape. We were trapped, and we had no idea what was going to happen next. As the second night approached, we all became more and more anxious. The strange symbols we had seen around the campsite were making us uneasy, and the whispers we had heard the night before were still ringing in our ears. We decided to set up a watch system, with one person staying up at all times to keep watch over the campsite. But it didn't seem to matter. Every time someone tried to sleep, they were woken up by strange noises and whispers. It was like we were being toyed with, like something was trying to break us down mentally before it attacked. We all knew we were in danger, but we didn't know how to escape. On the third day, we decided to try to find our way out again. We split up and searched for any signs of the trail, but we all came back empty-handed. We were lost, and we were running out of food and water. As the sun began to set on the third night, we all huddled together around the bonfire, trying to stay warm and keep our spirits up. But it was no use. The whispers had turned into full-blown voices now, and they were taunting us. They told us that we would never leave the woods, that we would be trapped there forever. They spoke of ancient rituals and sacrifices, of dark magic and unspeakable horrors. We were terrified, but we couldn't run. That night, as we were all huddled together, we heard footsteps approaching our campsite. We tried to prepare ourselves, but we had no idea what was coming. Suddenly, out of the darkness, a figure appeared. It was tall and thin, with long arms and legs, and it moved in an unnatural way. It was like it was made of shadows, and it radiated a sense of pure evil. We all froze, too scared to move. The figure walked slowly towards us, its eyes glowing red in the firelight. It stopped just a few feet away from us and stared at us for what felt like hours. And then it spoke. Its voice was like nails on a chalkboard, grating and high-pitched. It spoke of the darkness that lay in the heart of the woods, of the sacrifices that had been made to appease it, and of the fate that awaited us. We were all screaming now, our voices echoing through the woods. We knew that we were going to die, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. But then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. We were left alone in the woods, trembling and sobbing. The next morning, we found our way back to the trail. We ran all the way back to our cars and drove back to civilization as fast as we could. We never spoke of what had happened in the woods again, but we all knew that we had been lucky to escape with our lives. The woods were not a place of beauty and adventure. They were a place of unspeakable horrors, and we had been foolish to ever think otherwise. We thought we had left the horrors of the woods behind us, but we were wrong. The figure we had encountered had left its mark on us, and it haunted our dreams for weeks after our camping trip. We tried to forget about it, but it was always there, lurking in the back of our minds. We started to see shadows out of the corner of our eyes, and we heard whispers in the dead of night. We all became paranoid, too scared to be alone in the dark. We started to avoid going outside at night and slept with the lights on. And then, one day, one of us disappeared. We had all been hanging out at a friend's house, but when it was time to leave, one of us was gone. We searched the entire house and the surrounding area, but there was no sign of our missing friend. We knew that something was wrong. We knew that the figure from the woods had found us, and it was coming for us, one by one. We tried to stay together, but it was no use. We all fell victim to the figure, one by one. Some of us disappeared without a trace, while others were found dead, their bodies twisted and contorted in unnatural ways. The police investigated, but they found no clues, no leads. We were all alone, and we knew that we were going to die. And then, just when we thought it was all over, the figure appeared again. It spoke to us, its voice filling our minds with terror. It told us that we were all going to die, that we were all going to become sacrifices to the darkness that lay at the heart of the woods. We were helpless, trapped in its grasp. But then, something strange happened. The figure started to weaken, its form becoming less solid. It was like it was being pulled back into the darkness from which it had come. We all stood there, watching in horror as the figure disappeared, its voice fading away into the night. And then everything was quiet. We all knew that we had been lucky to survive, that we had been given a second chance. We all went our separate ways, trying to forget what had happened. But we never forgot. We knew that the woods were a place of darkness and horror, and that we had been lucky to escape with our lives. We knew that the figure from the woods would always be out there, waiting for its next victims. And so, we warn anyone who will listen. Stay away from the woods, for they hold unspeakable horrors. Stay away, or you may never return. Thank you for watching this 3 true creepy and disturbing camping horror stories. We hope that you were able to feel the fear and terror that we experienced during our camping trip horror stories. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing to our channel for more terrifying tales. Don't forget to hit that bell icon to be notified when we upload new content. And remember, if you ever decide to venture into the woods, be cautious and always stay alert. The darkness that lies within may be waiting for its next victims. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.